Yo, what's going on, young preacher? Welcome to another episode of Dear Young Preacher. My name is Benji, and I'm so excited that you're watching. If you didn't know, Dear Young Preacher is thoughts and experiences from one young preacher to another, and we just get to talk about the call that God has placed on our lives and the potential that He's purposed us for. And man, I'm so excited about this episode in particular. We have a person coming all the way from Oklahoma, Pastor Chandler Boyce. And he leads Youth America. And if you haven't heard of Youth America, you need to stop and start hearing about Youth America. Man, I'm so excited for what the knowledge he's about to drop on us today. And so if you always watch, continue to watch. If this is your first time, you're in for a treat. Man, if there's one thing I learned from Pastor Chandler so far is that he's a committed guy. So if he says he's going to do it, he's going to get it done no matter the cost. And man, that's challenged me in my own life, but it's also pushed me even stronger. And so thank you so much for being on this episode. And I'm so excited for what you're about to say. You know, like we always do, roll intro.
Hey, thanks for joining us today, dear young preacher. And I'm excited to talk to you today about something that I think it's important that a lot of younger, newer pastors, preachers, leaders need in their life. And maybe you're watching this because you are a pastor. Maybe you are you want to be a preacher. I'm a young leader. I'm only 32, and it's even funny when you look at the Bible. And you hear Paul talking to Timothy, who was an older leader talking to a younger leader, and he says, you know, there's a scripture where he says, don't let anyone look down upon you because you're young. That word young, when you take it back to the original time, young was anyone under 40. So I feel like I'm pretty young. That's a good thing. And so I want to talk to you about what I think is important in maybe that calling, in that desire that you want. And one of those things that I think that is important when it comes to ministry, when it comes to calling, when it comes to church, when it comes to preaching, is simply this, is that the first thing that I always ask someone when they say, hey, I want to preach, I want to be a preacher, the first question I ask them, where are you planted? Who are you called to? Who are the people and the place that you're called to? Because I think it's so important in ministry, in life. And even when you look at the Bible, when you look at the Old Testament, when you look at the disciples, the disciples were called to Jesus. They were called to Him to serve Him, to be around Him. When you look at Old Testament, it was always about a person, about a leader, and it's about a place, about a community. And I think one of the most important things for someone to do is to get planted in a church, to serve in a church. So many people want to get on the pulpit. So many people want to preach, but they're not in the pew. They're not serving. They're not giving. They're not asking their leader, hey, what do you need me to do? How can I help you? How can I help your vision? How can I help what God's doing through you? So I think one of the biggest important things that we've got to do as young leaders, I think one, planted. Two, you got to pray. And by prayer, you gotta get close. You gotta take time every day to spend time with God in your prayer, because your prayer life precedes so much in your life. It gets you through problems. It gets you through the pain. It gets you through so many situations. It keeps you in your calling, where God has you, where He's called you, where you should be planted. So one, you gotta plant. You got to pray. The next thing is you got to plow. You got to do the work. You got to serve the church, serve people, go to the hurting, go to those that are less fortunate and help them, serve them. You know, I just always think about one of the greatest things that I feel like Jesus told the disciples is that Jesus tells them, hey, I didn't come to be served, but to serve. He's saying we've got to be serving. So many people, they want the platform, they want the pulpit, but they're not putting in the time. They're not plowing. They're not doing the work. They're not serving. They're not stacking chairs. They're not out in the parking lot. Man, you got to be planted. You got to take time. So you got to plant. You got to pray. You got to plow, and you got to wait. You got to be patient in this time, because God's looking for people to build His kingdom. And the Bible tells us that if you'll build God's kingdom, if you'll take care of His kingdom, you know what God will do? He'll take care of our kingdom. So many times we want our desires. We want what we want to do. We want to preach. We want the mic, but we're not planted. we're not serving, we're not giving, we're not submitted to our leaders, we're not helping build the church, we're not loving people, we're not doing what just needs to be done. We want the lights, we want the cool photos, but we don't want to show up early and help set up, and we don't want to find out what our leaders need so we can take some weight and some pressure off of that. We want what we want, but it's not about that. It's about God's will, His way, His purpose, His ministry. And to do that, you've got to get planted. You got to get planted. You got to sow. You got to give. You got to serve. You got to pray. You got to pray for your leaders. You got to pray for your church. You got to pray for the people that are around you. You got to plow. You got to put in the hard work. You got to build. You got to be patient. You got to allow God to work through the church, work through you, work out the things in your life. And when you do that, He'll bring the rain, He'll bring the growth, He'll bring the fruit. And the reality is if you're called to preach, if you're called to pastor and lead, God will put you on that platform. God will put you where He needs you. But our job is to do His will, His way, to serve Him, to pray, to be planted, to stay committed. And we know that when we're planted and we take the time and we're patient, that our roots will grow deep, that it'll get us through anything that life might throw at us, and we'll see the fruit and we'll see the life and the opportunity that God has for us. But I believe that's only through planting, staying committed over time, praying, plowing. And I believe through that, God will use you, your voice, your finances, your giving, every part of your life to build His kingdom and to bring the good news of Jesus to everyone around you. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to talking to you soon.